By 1963, with Berlin and Cuba now temporarily defused, President Kennedy could deal with other hotspots, one of which he didn't consider too important, even though it would ultimately dominate U.S. foreign policy into the next decade.
Southeast Asia was not an area where Kennedy thought great things could be accomplished. He repeatedly made it clear that he did not want to get into a war there. He did perceive a problem, he did perceive a threat, he did spend some time on it, but he spent far more time on other issues than he did on Southeast Asia.
In 1954, U.S.-backed Ngo Dinh Diem was installed as Prime Minister of South Vietnam. Diem assured the Eisenhower administration that he favored democracy and would fight North Vietnamese insurgents to keep South Vietnam free from communism. But once entrenched as president of South Vietnam, Diem became a cruel dictator. He banned any future elections and utilized his special police headed by his brother, Ngo Dinh Nhu, to control any opposition through terror and imprisonment. By the end of the Eisenhower administration, there had been several coup attempts by Diem's own military. One of the biggest weaknesses of Diem's regime was that he did not have a solid relationship of trust with his generals.
I would doubt that a month went by in the whole of the Diem regime without some discussion of the possibility of a coup.
As a senator, John Kennedy had traveled to Vietnam and was impressed with Diem. But by the time Kennedy became president, Diem was no longer seen in the same glowing light.
Kennedy believes, in a sense, that we can't fight the war for them. We can help them learn how to fight the war. That's where special warfare and counterinsurgency come in. Send Green Berets, send advisors to help them do that. Now, what Kennedy does do is he escalates the number of advisors and the financial assistance. When he came in, there were about 500 or 1,000 advisors, maybe a little bit more. By the fall of 1963, there were over 16,000.
As always, Kennedy did not want to involve American soldiers in combat. In early 1961, prior to the Bay of Pigs, JFK urged the CIA to begin subversive operations in North Vietnam to send a message that the U.S. would no longer put up with the North's insurgency in the South. But the CIA operation, codenamed Operation Tiger, failed at every turn as a result of infiltration by North Vietnamese agents. Because of the CIA's failure, Kennedy turned over the covert war in Vietnam to the military in 1963. The growing U.S. military investment in Vietnam was kept secret from the world, in part because it violated the 1954 Geneva Agreement, calling for the cessation of hostilities in Vietnam. Another reason was to deceive the American public.
And that creates, for some people and for some analysts and some politicians, a problem, because they believe that what you do should be out in the sunlight. But the real world is a world in which even democracies have to sometimes do things secretly.
As the war dragged on, life in South Vietnam under President Diem was steadily worsening, and Kennedy could no longer ignore it. He and Diem were both Roman Catholic, but Kennedy found Diem's increasing persecution of Buddhists and other non-Catholics to be a serious problem. There was division in Washington on how to deal with Diem. In August 1963, an American-backed coup was considered and received great support from Henry Cabot Lodge, JFK's new ambassador to South Vietnam. Diem's generals had approached Lodge about possible U.S. support of a coup against the dictator. However, the generals were not quite ready to make their move on Diem. Then, in October, word reached President Kennedy that the plot against Diem was about to be carried out. The mood at the White House was somber and the opinions mixed. Robert Kennedy felt an obligation to Diem as an American ally. He, McNamara, and Maxwell Taylor all resisted the idea of a coup. Dean Rusk supported the overthrow, citing evidence showing that Diem, despite warnings from high-ranking American advisors, arrogantly resisted any change. Above all, JFK did not want another Bay of Pigs. He carefully considered all the information and opinions. His decision was to support the overthrow of Diem. On November 1, 1963, the South Vietnamese Army successfully deposed President Diem and his brother Nhu, and then executed them.
Maxwell Taylor reported that Kennedy was deeply shocked by the news that Diem had been assassinated. In the last week of August in 1963, Kennedy said flatly that if Diem and Nhu were overthrown, they should be exiled, and that was all that was supposed to happen to them.
Kennedy agonized, feeling a sense of responsibility for what had happened to Diem. Just 3 weeks later, in Dallas, Texas, President Kennedy himself was cut down by gunfire.